Hello, Year 4. How nice to see you again. Hope you are doing well. So, today we are continuing to look at conscience. Remember, not conscience, conscience. What is conscience? Tell me from last lesson. Hopefully you've remembered. What is our conscience? Well, according to last lesson, it was the voice in our head that tells us when things are right and when things are wrong. And remember last lesson I said we are going to dip our toes into this thousands of years of discussion about what conscience is, how we make decisions about what's right and wrong. It's called ethics, and that's what we're looking at. Today we are looking at a chap who lived over 1,600 years ago, so a really long time ago, and his name was Augustine. He was probably one of the most famous writers and thinkers in the Christian tradition. So really important figure that we're going to look at, Augustine. And he had a theory about the conscience, and we're going to look at that and see whether we agree or disagree. But first, we are just going to take some time to learn a bit about Augustine. He's a really interesting guy. And this is him. This is a man called St. Augustine. And this painting was painted well after he died, but it tells us a lot. We're going to be kind of artistic detectives looking at this incredible painting, finding out from it what we can learn about who Augustine was and what he did when he was alive. So firstly, can you see there in the top left-hand corner, the word veritas is painted on some light coming from the top of the screen. And that's going to be really important. So I wonder what that could mean. Veritas. Well, it doesn't sound like a word that we know in English, so it must be in a different language. We can also see that light is there around his head as well. And we know from looking at other Christian paintings that if someone has a big thing of light around their head like that, that's a halo. So we know that we're looking at someone who's got a halo. What does that mean? Well, we're going to look at that in a minute. What does it tell us about Augustine that he has a halo around his head? On his clothes, these are gorgeous clothes. Look at how beautiful these sort of golden robes are. But there are pictures of Jesus. This is a picture of Jesus here. And there are other pictures of saints as well. So what might that tell us about his religion or his job? Well, let's have a think. Okay, there's an open book here. If you zoom in on this painting, you can see that it is actually the Bible. So the Bible is the Christian holy book. There are pictures of Jesus. We're starting to get an idea of what might be important to this person. He's holding a heart, okay? And that heart is on fire. Well, that's really unusual. You don't see a lot of paintings of people these days holding a heart that's on fire. And I don't think the artist would have put it in there if it didn't have a meaning, if there wasn't a reason for it. He didn't really spend a lot of his time holding hearts that were on fire. So what does that mean? Well, we'll find out in a second. And he has a quill in his hand. And a quill is like an old-fashioned pen for writing. So, like, you might have seen a fountain pen like this before. And a quill is like a fountain pen with a feather, made out of a feather. It's before they really had, like, ballpoint pens and things like that. So what does that tell us? Why would someone paint a picture of him holding a quill, holding a writing implement? Okay, let's take a look. So we can tell from the painting that Augustine became a very important Christian, but he wasn't always that way. What does the painting on the book cover tell you about how he might have been feeling earlier in his life? This is a very, very famous book called The Confessions by St. Augustine, and it's a brilliant book. I love it. It's one of my favourite books. On the front cover, though, we always don't know if you've heard people say don't judge a book by its cover. Sometimes it's quite a useful thing to do. On the front cover, there's this guy who is Augustine, but he looks very different in this painting. So what kind of things can we learn about Augustine as a young man from this painting? Well, he's still got his halo, so he's still important. He's still a saint to Christians, but he looks really upset and sad and miserable. And actually, the Confessions are his sort of story of his life until he became a Christian. So he wasn't a very happy young man. He did bad things, and the Confessions are him confessing or owning up to those bad things. He thinks a lot about conscience and what's right or wrong, because earlier on in his life he didn't listen to his conscience. He didn't do the right things. So let's find out about what some of those things were. So Augustine didn't become a Christian until he was 31, or didn't become a very serious Christian, a devout Christian, until he was 31. Before that, he lived a life that was full of sin. And sin, for Christians, is actions that go against God. Bad things, basically. He gambled, he drank, he had foolish relationships, he even stole. When he became a Christian, he wrote down his confessions so that he could work out where he went wrong and advise others. One of the mistakes he said he made was not listening to his conscience, which he thought was the word of God telling him how to act. So that's really interesting. Augustine, one of the most important people in Christianity, until he was 31, wasn't even really a Christian, did bad things, gambled, drank, stole. How interesting that he then becomes this really, really important figure, always shown with a halo in paintings. Here's another painting of him with a halo. Someone any Christian would still read today. Amazing. So Augustine, even though he lived 1,600 years ago, acted in ways that we can probably all recognise as being naughty, and perhaps even against our own conscience. And so these are quotes from the book. Here it is. Oh. These are quotes from this book, which is the Confessions. And again, it's the story of his early life. It's the story of his the mistakes that he made. And I picked out these because I think they might ring a bell with you, because they're about school and they're about his relationship. So this is, oh my God, what miseries and mockeries did I experience when it was impressed on me that obedience to my teachers was proper to my boyhood estate. So let me put that in plain English. He's saying how he felt miserable and mocked and sad when he had to follow his teacher's instructions, when he had to be obedient to his teachers. And the second quote, we were sinning by writing or reading or studying less than our assigned lessons. For I did not, O Lord, lack memory or capacity, for by thy will I possessed enough for my age. However, my mind was absorbed only in play, and I was punished for this. And again, let me put that in plain English. So he's saying that he didn't do enough work. He studied less than his assigned lessons. And he didn't lack memory or capacity. So he didn't lack the brain power to be able to do well at school. He was a clever young man. He says he possessed enough of that for his age. However, his mind was absorbed in play, and he was punished for this. So if you've ever played computer games when you should be doing your homework, if you've ever been distracted in class, Augustine was there with you. He was experiencing the same things when he was a young boy. Okay. That takes us on to conscience. So this is the last part of the lesson. We're going to look at Augustine's theory of how conscience works. And I've got two slides. I've got this one, and I've also got the slide of how it doesn't work. And you can find those slides also in your booklet as well to help you follow along and understand at home. It is a little... Let's explain it and see how we get on. So, Augustine believes that God, the Christian God, is perfectly good. God can't do anything wrong whatsoever. It would just be impossible for God to do anything wrong. He says that God whispers to us through our conscience. He believes that the voice we hear in our heads, it's God. It's the voice of God. So people must listen to God's voice. And when people do listen to that voice, they make the right moral decisions. Okay? So God is perfectly good. Okay? God is always right, always good, always knows what to do. And God whispers to us through our conscience, through the voice in our head. You listen to that conscience, you make the right actions. So when Augustine is talking about doing the wrong thing at school here, when he's talking about not studying hard enough, he is ignoring the voice of God. So let's have a look at how that works. So God is perfectly good and whispers to us through our conscience. Fair enough. That's how Augustine believed the conscience worked. But then this is what happens. So people ignore God's voice and listen to others instead. So remember last lesson we looked at all those different places that we get our conscience from. We looked at friends, we looked at family, we looked at school, we looked at teachers and the media. So Augustine says if you're not listening just to God, just to your conscience, and you're listening to all these other things, you are not going to make the right choices because you are ignoring God. And so people sin, which is they do bad things, by not making those choices. So, hopefully, you'd be able to explain that back to me. I wish I could check with you, but unfortunately that's not possible, is it? But hopefully you'd be able to look at those diagrams and check. So at the beginning of next lesson, we're going to go over this again, make sure that we understand it. But essentially, Augustine says, when you hear someone in your head telling you what's right, what's wrong, you should feel guilty, you should go help someone, he says that's the voice of God. Okay, so 2 more tasks, 2 quite straightforward tasks. Number 1, I just want you to define what a sin is, okay? So hopefully you've established that from listening to this video. What is a sin? And number 2, we have to, oh yes, no, that's the next slide. So we have to decide what we should do with our birthday cake again. Remember, we have this birthday cake. Are we going to share it? Are we going to eat it all ourselves? So we have to decide whether we should share our birthday cake equally or whether we should eat most of it ourselves. How would Augustine say we could help make this moral decision? Use the word conscience in your answer. So I think Augustine would say that we should listen to that is the voice of, okay, those sorts of things. So yes, it's really impressive if you've been able to follow along with today's lesson. I genuinely don't think there are many people in year 4 across the country who are as clever as you are to be following along with what Augustine is saying. It's amazing. I hope you enjoyed today's lesson. We're going to look at a figure next week called Aquinas. Has an amazing name. He has a slightly different idea of what the conscience is. And we're also going to look at a painting of him and see what we can work out. I will see you then. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. If you've got any questions, please don't worry about emailing me. Email me whenever you'd like to ask questions, because it is quite challenging what we're looking at. And if you don't fully understand, maybe you want to go back and watch some videos. Maybe you want to read through what's in the booklet. That might help you. So have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you later. Have a good one, year 4. Bye-bye.